Welcome back to another Drawing in the Dark. My name is Levi Smith. I draw and tattoo for a living, and here we are. The last couple of videos I've been doing have been kind of focused on concepts of art, not exactly like tutorial how-to type stuff, but more like conceptual tools. So I'm going to keep going with that whole thing as we get into this odd little skull and twisted bones kind of piece here. As always, I'm using my Illo sketchbook, drawing with a ballpoint pen, and I start off with all of these light, basic shapes as I block out my page here and work into what I'm drawing. So I came up with this twisted bone stuff good 20 years ago now or so, playing around with different ideas with tattoo designs and elements that could be added in a tattoo, especially in like around the 2010s. There's a lot of biomechanical, bioorganic, tribal kind of Celtic knotwork type stuff going around, and so just noodling around and playing with different ideas, and textures and patterns and stuff. I ended up drawing this stuff up. I think part of it was influenced by an old drawing that I did in the late 90s after getting like really involved into like the darkness and Witchblade comic books. And I think that there's definitely an influence from there, and then just letting other elements like Celtic knotwork and like 90s tribal kind of filter in and help design this this look. But yeah, it's pretty fun. I've tattooed on a number of times, and yeah, I really enjoy doing it. It is definitely something that I can just kind of sit down and start scribbling a bunch of like overlapping circles and triangles and shapes and stuff, and then end up with something that looks kind of cool, But yeah, so that's kind of what this is. It had been a little while since I've actually drawn some twisted bone kind of stuff like this. It isn't something I do a whole lot of, but I do have fun with it.
It was all in your mind.
And that leads into my concept that I wanted to cover for today, which is composition. Using basic shapes and light, soft lines to kind of block out and structure your drawing or piece of artwork, where you're going to use the most rudimentary and basic kind of elements to establish kind of where things go
It was all in your
in the
mind.
piece. The foundations. And that's really what you can see me doing here with this, as I just play around with really using a lot of like basic half shapes, arcs, half circles to play around with all of the various elements
It
of
was
the
all in your mind.
stuff that's coming out from around the skull here. What I call twisted bones, which is kind of a combination between like 90s American tribal, Celtic knotwork, and bone kind of texture type stuff. And so using, the a softer hand, as I tend to do in my videos, to rough out areas, I can search through and build a good foundation that's going to be easy to read and something that I'm actually going to enjoy drawing. And before I get into any of the details and stuff, all of my general like anatomy and spatial stuff, the mirroring from one side to the other and everything in here has pretty much already been worked out, so that I can just focus on things like line weight, texture, shade, all that stuff.
It was all in your mind.
So one of the powers of composition is that even when you do have a lot of complex patterns and shapes like we do in this one, a clear composition will help guide a viewer through the piece and help make sure that it's still easy to understand, even though there could be a lot going on with it. While it's not always obvious to the casual viewer, its impact is always apparent in a piece. Something like this, people may not automatically cue in to say like the upside down kind of triangle composition to a lot of the bone stuff, but it being there and its scaffolding helps to give a lot of order to something that looks kind of chaotic. So there are a few concepts in composition that I wanted to talk about directly. Uh, Concepts like shape language, positive progression or flow, the horizon line, as well as the rule of thirds, which is probably one of the most obvious and important ones, um, are the primary tools that you'll use when working out a composition of a piece. One of the things that you'll notice with like thumbnails or layouts or underdrawings and stuff with paintings and comic books and everything, that's really where a lot of the primary composition of the piece is worked out. So before you get into any of the heavy details, before you get into drawing any faces or poses or hair or eyes or grass or leaves on trees or anything like that, you really want to get that composition worked out. Sometimes it's even helpful to work out compositional elements as small as you can. I will sometimes do tiny thumbnails of pieces just to kind of play around with the compositional elements and stuff to see what kind of impact that'll have before I even get into any of the crazy details and stuff. So the first one that I want to get into a little bit here is the shape language. This is the use of shape in your piece, whether it's the standard square, circle, triangle type thing, or more complex ideas such as softer shapes, harder shapes, or more like hooked, edgier shapes. A lot of production companies and art studios will use a consistent kind of shape language throughout a publication or a franchise, such as Disney's Toy Story, Powerpuff Girls, it's Gennady Tartakovsky, right? Or even like World of Warcraft. There's a consistency in the overall like volumes of shapes and stuff that they use in their artwork that kind of make it iconic and really super quick to recognize. And so shape language overall can be a really, really powerful tool in your overall composition. Positive progression is related to the movement of the piece or elements within the piece. Primary elements facing to the right, from the viewer's perspective at least, are facing forward, kind of like in a moving from left to right in the way that like the Western world kind of reads left to right, how our books go and stuff. So that's a forward facing point. And then along with that, and then upward facing or moving elements, those are positive kind of movements within a piece, where down or facing towards the left of the piece are kind of viewed as negative or backward. And so, what direction an element in the piece is kind of moving or facing will give a sense of motion and mood to a piece. And that can be subtle or obvious, where you may have a piece where a figure is falling, where you're going to have like a downward falling kind of progression. You have like a racing horse that's racing across the canvas. Um, you how you face that horse is going to say a lot about what's going on. Where if it's racing to the right of the image, then it's kind of racing towards something forward, positive. If it's racing to the left of the piece, then it feels like it's running away from something or backward in a way. And so it's not about choosing positive progression in a direct kind of sense, but understanding that the horse running to the right is forward and a horse running to the left is backward, away from something. And knowing where and why to apply that concept can be the key as far as how things feel in this sense. Moving on to the horizon line. The horizon line also falls into the rule of thirds, and it determines the point of view of the viewer. The lower the horizon line, the higher the viewer is, and then the higher the horizon line, the lower the viewer is, at least in relation to the focus of the piece. Middle and neutral horizon lines are kind of boring, but still do have their place depending on what you're trying to use it for. And even though the horizon line may not always apply to an art piece, you may not have kind of like a landscape or something where you're making that a horizon line at all applies. Its place as part of the rule of thirds does apply. And so the rule of thirds is dividing your canvas, paper, or screen file into sections of 3 across and 3 down. It's creating kind of like a tic-tac-toe board or a 9 square grid over your overall piece. And what it does is it ends up creating zones and points of interest. And using these zones and points will help you establish a much more dynamic and interesting composition to your piece. And this is a pretty easy one to apply and use. When you use the 4 intersecting points where these lines cross each other, those areas become more interesting focal points than, say, just using the center of your canvas. And it automatically just makes everything a little bit more interesting. And it divides the areas of your canvas in a way that just ends up more dynamic. It draws the eye in, and it can play around with a lot of concepts of like balance, mood, movement, point of view, and the intentionality of your work. So you can play in with that horizon line and choose the lower third of your canvas, and then that will help establish, even though you may not have like an actual physical horizon in your piece, it'll still help direct or establish a point of view and kind of tell the reader where they are in relation to your piece, if that's even an element that you're concerned with. But using all of these different grids and points in there can really help direct eye movement, focus, weight in the piece, consideration, and really becomes a powerful tool. So all these concepts of composition I've been talking about, as far as shape language, positive progression, the horizon line, the rule of thirds, with study and use tend to become instinctual over time, where your application and preferences of composition become more of like an aspect of your style and your intent rather than like academic rules to follow. So, learning about them and kind of understanding them and then applying them to your work can really make a big difference without really becoming, say, like a list of boxes that you need to check off while you're working on stuff. I mean, with, say, like this piece here, I didn't exactly do any of those things for this piece, but at the same time, it kind of falls into these compositional elements and stuff. I could use these concepts to further describe and break down an image that really, had no mind for these things while it was being made. Uh, you don't have to know or apply these kinds of concepts for them to apply to your work, really. Like I said, a lot of these concepts end up becoming internalized after a certain point, and it's not a direct kind of intention of, well, what am I doing here? Am I using the right shape language? Am I, using the rule of thirds? Now, when things aren't necessarily working and you're having a hard time building a good balance for stuff, then it might be good to go back and study this kind of stuff or consider it or lay out a grid into your piece to kind of help you identify, like, oh, okay, my horizon line's too neutral, or I keep using, I keep focusing on the dead center of the canvas or whatever it is. These rules can help kind of tell you where you need to move and adjust to make your stuff more interesting to look at, which is a very important goal of any kind of visual art, is making sure that it is at least interesting to look at. I don't know if this piece right here in particular is rather interesting to look at. There's definitely a lot of going on. It's been a while since I've done like this twisted bone kind of stuff, so it really was fun getting into it. One of the hardest things I had with this one really was trying to get the symmetry of all of this stuff to kind of work from side to side. And early on, there was a lot of adjusting and going back and forth and trying to find those symmetrical areas and stuff. Having it being time elapsed almost 250 times, I think, in this particular video. You really can't see a lot of that bumbling around because it's also sped up. Everything just looks like it was all done, intentionally. But there was a lot of wandering around in this piece, and in fact, the overall piece itself took about 8 hours. Yeah, almost 9 hours, according to my notes. That I spent drawing on this one over about 3 days. I thought I was sitting down to just kind of knock out something that was going to be easy, kind of, simple for my mind to work out and everything. But yeah, it ended up taking quite a long time. So I don't know how much more of these kinds of art concepts that I'm going to stick with. I don't know if that's what I'm trying to make my channel about.
It was all in your mind.
This this shading this shading here really took most of the amount of time trying to work out this shading to get to the right level of darkness with this ballpoint pen, and really pump the contrast for all these different little twisted bone kind of elements and stuff. Just took forever of hatching and hatching and hatching. Something like this, I would even recommend that you not even do it like this. Get a darker marker, a Sharpie, a brush, or something if you're going to be filling in some dark areas and stuff in a piece like this. I think the outcome is great and faster than something like this where it's just hatching upon hatching upon hatching. I really think that's where most of the time went into this piece, honestly, where a lot of the sketching and layout and stuff that gets all pretty obvious. The detailing and stuff isn't particularly too crazy in this kind of piece, but this shading and darkening and darkening and layering and letting it dry and making sure I don't smear ink all over the place just was a lot. It was a lot of work. Yeah. But, could be worse.
It was all in your mind. It was all in your mind. Mine. 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 It was all in your mind.
Again, the focus on these videos is just killing me. I'm going to be trying out a couple of other experiments with the focus. Having the autofocus with the camera that I'm using, where it's just always shifting focus from my hand to the paper, was just driving me nuts. So I've been trying this kind of fixed focus option on my camera. I don't have the best camera. And then there's also the manual focus, and I haven't really been able to figure out exactly how to adjust the manual focus. I haven't really found a lot of options on that stuff. And it's such a generic Amazon cheap camera. I mean, it's a 4K camera, but it's just kind of terrible, I guess. I got to sort this out, man. It's driving me crazy. And so I don't know. I do have a couple of other ideas that I want to play around with drawing wise that aren't necessarily all just skulls and stuff. I think I'm going to draw a world map for the next one. Yeah, I think so. I don't know exactly where that'll go. Probably talk a lot about the different stuff about like drawing fantasy world maps, like Tolkien or Game of Thrones or stuff like that. I absolutely love drawing world maps, and I think that would be really fun to put into the sketchbook and make a video out of it. Who knows? Maybe it'll do well. Anyway, thank you for checking everything out. Thanks for watching along, especially if you've gotten this far. I really appreciate it if you dropped a like and a subscribe and do all those things. I've got all kinds of links in the description. The music for this episode is Vlad the Broken Templar by Bass Eclectics. That's Aaron and Wade Ross. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the show, and I'm willing to come back for the next one. We'll see you then. Later.